So you want to own a tugboat. Small boat, enormous engine, permanently filthy, and shaped like a clenched fist. Not glamorous. Nobody puts a tugboat poster on a bedroom wall. But pay attention to this one, because a tugboat is the most quietly profitable machine in this entire series, and it earns money in a way nothing else here does. Here is what I mean. Every other asset we have looked at gets paid for doing something. The carrier gets paid for museum tickets. The bomber gets paid for rides. The cargo plane gets paid for the flight. A tugboat gets paid for being close enough. Most of the money in this business is not earned while towing. It is earned by being in position, under contract, ready, on a day when nothing goes wrong. And on the rare day when something does go very wrong, there is a body of maritime law, hundreds of years old, that can hand a single boat more money in one afternoon than it makes in a normal year. This is the full ledger. What tugs cost, why the specification that matters is not length or horsepower, the day rate business underneath everything, the salvage law that turns a bad day at sea into a payday, the port dependency that traps owners, and why this is one of the very few assets in this series that holds its value for decades. Start with the boat. The buy-in. Tugs come from a few places, and naval surplus is one of them. Navies operate large fleets of harbor tugs and ocean-going fleet tugs, and when those retire, they enter a civilian market that is genuinely healthy. There is nothing exotic about this. A tug built for a naval base does exactly the same job in a commercial port, which is why these transfers are common and unremarkable. Beyond surplus, there is a deep second-hand commercial market, and there are new builds from yards that specialize in nothing else. Now, price. And here the range is wide. An older harbor tug, tired, due for survey, can be bought for a figure that sounds impossibly low for a steel vessel with thousands of horsepower in it. A modern purpose-built escort tug with high bollard pull and current class certification costs. What a serious piece of industrial equipment costs, which is a great deal more. But the number that actually determines value is not the price, the age, or even the horsepower. It is bollard pull. Bollard pull is the measured force a tug can exert on a stationary line, and it is the single specification that decides what work the boat is allowed to do. Ports set minimum bollard pull requirements for assisting vessels of a given size. Terminal operators write it into contracts. Insurers care about it. So the question is never how big is the boat. It is how hard does it pull, and is that enough for the ships that call at the port where you intend to work? Two boats of identical length can differ enormously here, because bollard pull comes from the whole propulsion package, the hull form, the machinery, and the drive system, not from size alone. A newer vessel with modern azimuth drives can outpull an older conventional boat that looks bigger tied up alongside it. Buyers who shop by appearance get this wrong constantly, which is precisely why the measured figure exists on a certificate rather than being estimated by eye. This matters enormously, because ships have grown. A tug that was perfectly adequate for the vessels calling at a port 20 years ago may simply not meet the requirement for the ships calling there today. Your boat has not changed, its customer has. That single dynamic explains most of the secondhand market. Tugs cascade downward. A boat that no longer meets requirements at a major container terminal moves to a smaller port, then to barge work, then to a role where nobody is measuring. And that cascade is worth understanding as a buyer, because it works in your favor if you are patient. A tug being pushed out of a major port is not a bad boat. It is frequently an excellent boat with a good survey history that simply no longer suits the traffic where it worked. Buy that vessel for a smaller port that will not outgrow it for 20 years, and you have acquired quality at a discount created entirely by somebody else's customers getting bigger. Which brings us to the part that makes this asset unusual. Tugs last. Properly maintained, a steel tug hull has a working life measured in decades. Engines get replaced, sometimes more than once. Electronics get replaced several times. Deck equipment gets renewed. The hull carries on. That is genuinely rare in this series. A warbird decays, a bomber runs on components with hard lives, a helicopter throws away perfect parts on schedule, a tug, looked after, keeps working, and a well-maintained boat with a strong survey history holds value in a way almost nothing else here does. You are buying an industrial asset, not a wasting one. Remember that when we get to the verdict. It changes the entire logic of a purchase. When an asset depreciates towards scrap, every pound spent on it is consumption and you are simply managing decline. When an asset holds value, maintenance spending is protection of capital, and the boat you own in 20 years may still be worth a meaningful fraction of what you paid, sometimes more in nominal terms. Very few things in this series can say that, and it is the quiet reason tug families stay tug families across generations. What you inherit. Take delivery. And here is what comes with it. First, crew. And this is the biggest single fact about tug economics, so understand it properly. A working tug in a busy port is not a 9-to-5 business. Ships arrive at 3 in the morning. Tides do not negotiate. Depending on the operation, you may be crewing around the clock, which means multiple full crews rotating, not one crew working long hours. Wages, rotations, certification, training, and rest hour compliance are all regulated and all expensive. For most tug operations, crew is the largest line in the accounts. Larger than fuel, larger than maintenance. Everything else in this video is a detail compared to payroll. And crew is not a cost you can flex when work slows. Certified mariners do not sit at home unpaid waiting for a ship to arrive. And if you let them go, you cannot simply reassemble the team when a contract returns. Good crews are retained through quiet periods deliberately, because the alternative is being unable to accept work when it comes back. That is a fixed cost by choice as much as by regulation, and the operators who understand it price accordingly. Second, you inherit classification and survey. A commercial vessel operates under a classification society and a flag state, with periodic surveys, dry docking intervals, and a certificate regime that governs whether the boat is allowed to work at all. Miss a survey window and the boat is not a tug, it is a very heavy ornament. Third, dry dock. Every few years the boat comes out of the water, and that is a substantial planned expense involving hull inspection, coating, anode replacement, shaft and propeller work, and whatever the survey finds. Anyone who has watched the Battleship episode already knows the pattern. Water and steel remain in permanent negotiation, and dry dock is where the bill for that negotiation arrives. Fourth, fuel. Tugs burn heavily when they work, because the entire point of the boat is applying enormous force. Saving grace is that they spend a lot of time not working, and a tug idling at a berth burns very little compared to one pushing on a ship's hull. Fifth, insurance, and specifically protection and indemnity cover. Tugs work in close quarters with vessels worth orders of magnitude more than themselves. Value at risk is not your boat, it is the ship you are pushing, the terminal you are pushing it toward, and the cargo inside it. That asymmetry defines the insurance conversation entirely. Sixth, you inherit the port, and this is the one that catches people, so it gets its own section later. The revenue layers. There are 5 ways a tug earns, and they behave completely differently from each other. Layer 1 is harbor assist, the daily bread. Ships arriving and departing need help berthing, unberthing, and maneuvering in confined water. This is charged per job or per hour. It happens constantly in a working port, and it is predictable. It is also competitive. In most ports, there are established operators with existing contracts and enough boats to guarantee coverage, and a single tug arriving hopefully does not displace them. Those incumbents are not protected by anything unfair. They are protected by the fact that a terminal cannot risk a ship waiting because the only available tug is unavailable. Coverage is the product being sold, and coverage requires spare capacity. That requirement quietly sets the minimum size of a serious operator, and it is why the harbor towage business in most ports consists of a small number of companies rather than many individual owners. Layer 2 is the retainer or standby contract, and if you have watched the last few episodes, you already know why this matters. Terminals, ports, and industrial facilities pay for guaranteed availability. The boat is contracted to be there, ready, whether or not a ship needs it that day. This is the same structure as capacity payments on a power plant, availability rates on a firefighting aircraft, and standby rates on a helicopter. It keeps appearing across completely unrelated industries because it solves the same problem every time. Fixed costs run continuously. So, revenue that arrives continuously is worth more than revenue that arrives occasionally, even at a lower headline rate. Layer 3 is ocean towing. Moving barges, moving rigs, moving vessels that cannot move themselves. This is longer duration work, day-rated, and it takes the boat away from the harbor for extended periods. Higher revenue per contract, but the boat is committed. That commitment is a real trade-off rather than a technicality. A tug crossing an ocean on a tow cannot take a harbor job, cannot answer a retainer call, and cannot respond to anything happening at home. Operators with a single boat therefore face a genuine choice between steady local income and larger occasional contracts, and choosing wrong can mean losing a harbor relationship that took years to build while chasing one profitable voyage. Layer 4 is project and support work. Dredging support, construction support, offshore energy support, cable and pipeline work. This tends to be contract-based, seasonal or project length, and often pays well because the customer needs a specific capability on a specific schedule. Layer 5 is salvage, and salvage deserves its own beat because it is unlike anything else in this series. Listen to that again. Maritime salvage law is one of the oldest commercial frameworks in the world, and its central principle is deliberately strange. If you save a vessel in danger, you are entitled to a reward based on the value of what you saved. Not a fee for your time, not a day rate, a share of the value preserved. Say that again. Rescue a ship and its cargo, and the payment is calculated from what that ship and cargo were worth, not from what the job cost you. Its counterpart is equally severe, and it is the phrase that defines the whole field. No cure, no pay. Fail. And in the classic form of the arrangement, you receive nothing at all. You burn the fuel, you risked your boat and your crew, and you go home with the experience. That structure exists for a reason. It creates an enormous incentive for any capable vessel nearby to intervene immediately rather than negotiate while a ship goes down. Maritime law wants boats to help first and argue about money afterwards, and it makes that behavior rational by making success extremely well paid. For a tug owner, this is the lottery ticket bolted to the side of an otherwise ordinary business. Most tugs never claim a significant salvage award, but a boat in the right place at the right moment, with a competent master who knows what to do and what to sign, can generate a single payment that reshapes a small company's balance sheet. Do not build a business on it. Salvage awards are the reason tug owners tell good stories. Day rates are the reason tug owners have houses. There is also a professional layer here that is easy to miss. Dedicated salvage companies exist. They are highly specialized, and they carry equipment and expertise that an ordinary harbor tug does not. When something serious happens, those firms are usually who ends up doing the work. An opportunistic tug may assist in the early hours and be properly compensated for it, but the notion of a small operator stumbling into a company-changing award is much rarer than the stories suggest. The ledger, the cost sheet, then. Crew, the dominant line, running continuously, with rotations and certification. Fuel, heavy when working, modest when idle. Dry dock and survey, planned, periodic, and never as cheap as forecast. Classification and flag compliance, ongoing. Protection and indemnity insurance, priced against the value of everything you operate near. Hull and machinery insurance on the boat itself. Maintenance, which on a tug is constant, because everything on deck lives in saltwater and everything below is under load. Towing gear, lines, and winch maintenance, which is safety critical and consumable. Berthing fees for the tug's own home berth. Management, dispatch, and compliance staff on shore. And a contingency, because the working environment involves putting a small boat against a very large one, repeatedly, in weather. Add it together and a working tug carries substantial fixed costs, most of them running whether or not a ship arrives. That single fact is the reason the retainer layer matters so much, and it is the reason the next section exists. The trap. Here is the structural trap, and it is different from every other one in this series. A tugboat is worth what one specific port needs it to be worth. Think about what that means. Your boat's value and your entire revenue depend on a particular harbor, its traffic, the size of ships calling there, and the contracts already held by the operators working it. If that port loses a shipping line, your work halves. If ships calling there get larger and your bollard pull no longer meets requirements, you are excluded from the best work regardless of how good your boat is. If the port authority restructures its towage arrangements, a decision made in an office can end your business without anyone consulting you. And you cannot easily move. In theory, a tug is mobile, which is the whole point of a boat. In practice, relocating means entering another port where established operators already hold the contracts, where you have no relationships, and where the harbor master has never heard of you. So you own a mobile asset with an immobile business. That is the trap. Not cost, not maintenance, concentration. Most small tug operators depend on a small number of customers in one location, and that dependency is invisible right up until the day it matters. A second trap is quieter, and it comes from the salvage story. New owners hear about salvage awards, buy a boat, and position themselves hoping for the payday. It is the maritime version of buying a lottery ticket and calling it a retirement plan. Salvage is real, it is genuinely lucrative, and it is not a business model. How the survivors do it. So who actually makes this work? First, they secure the contract before the boat. Same lesson as the cargo plane, and it keeps appearing because it keeps being right. Successful operators have a terminal relationship, a retainer, or a committed customer before they take on a vessel. Boats get bought against work that exists. Second, they buy bollard pull for the port they intend to serve, plus margin for the ships that will be calling in 10 years. Buying exactly enough capability for today's traffic is how owners get cascaded downward into progressively worse work. Third, they run more than one boat as soon as they can. A single vessel cannot guarantee coverage, and coverage is what customers are actually buying. Two boats is not twice the business. It is a different category of business, because it is the point at which you can promise availability. Fourth, they treat survey and dry dock as scheduled certainties funded in advance, exactly like the engine reserve on an aircraft. Both the bill and the date are known. Operators who treat it as a surprise are choosing to be surprised. Fifth, they diversify the customer base deliberately, because concentration is the thing that kills them. Sixth, they invest in the master. On a tug, the person driving the boat is not a driver. Ship handling in confined water with a live vessel is a genuine skill, and the difference between a good master and an adequate one shows up in damage claims, customer retention, and whether the pilots ask for your boat by name. That last point is worth sitting with. In this industry, reputation is held by individuals as much as companies, and a master who is trusted by the local pilots is a commercial asset. It also creates a succession problem that quietly ends small companies. When the master who built every relationship in the port retires, the contracts do not automatically transfer to whoever holds the wheel next. Operators who plan for that bring the next person along years in advance, working alongside the pilots, building their own standing. Those who do not discover that the goodwill on their balance sheet was actually attached to one individual. The verdict. So, should you own a tugboat? If you want a boat to enjoy, no. It is a working vessel with a crew, a survey regime, and an insurance profile built around the fact that it operates inches from things worth hundreds of millions. But as a business, this is one of the strongest assets in the entire series. Steady demand, because ships will always need help berthing. Retainer structures that pay for readiness, real barriers to entry that protect incumbents, and an asset that holds value across decades rather than depreciating towards zero. Here is the good year. The boat is on a retainer that covers its fixed costs. Harbor work runs steadily on top of it. A project charter fills a quiet month. Dry dock comes and goes on schedule with the fund already in place. Port grows, a new terminal opens, and a second boat becomes justifiable. Your master is respected. The pilots request your vessel, and the contract renews without going to tender. Now the bad year. A shipping line reroutes and harbor movements drop. Larger vessels arrive and your bollard pull falls short of the new requirement. The dry dock survey finds steelwork nobody budgeted. Fuel rises against fixed-rate contracts. A single customer who is quietly 40% of your revenue awards their towage to somebody else. And the crew payroll runs every single week regardless, because a tug without a crew is not available, and availability is the entire product. Same boat. What separates them is contract structure and how many customers you have. Every other machine in this series is paid for what it does. A tug is paid for what would have happened if it had not been there. That is why the money is in retainers rather than tows, why salvage law rewards outcome rather than effort, and why a boat sitting quietly at a berth all week is not idle. It is doing exactly what it is paid for. Nobody buys the pull. They buy the certainty that the pull will be available at 3 in the morning, in bad weather, when a ship the size of a building is coming in with the tide. You are not buying a boat. You are selling the absence of a disaster.